Okay, in this tutorial, we're going to review how to answer exam questions that have a focus on describing and explaining the population structure. And for this example, we're going to use a population pyramid of a developing country, which in this case is Malawi. So there's two parts to this question that you can see on the page. The first part is to describe the population structure, and the second part is to explain. Now, these two could be separate questions in their own right, where you are just asked to describe or you're just asked to explain. And I'll look at both parts to this question. Describing a population structure of any population pyramid, whether it is Malawi or another developing world country or a developed world country like the United Kingdom, involves the same process. You need to make a number of statements about different age categories and give amounts of people in those different age categories and contrast them with others. So the approach to describing, if it was this particular question, would look something like this. The most common age group is found in the 0 to 4 age category with approximately 3.5 million. Now that's the first statement that would get you a mark. Why? Because first of all, you've identified the females as being roughly 1.7 and the male side roughly 1.7. If you add those two sides together, you end up with about 3.5 million people in Malawi in this age group. Now, you don't have to be exactly precise, but as long as you are roughly estimating the amount reasonably accurately, and more importantly, you've identified the male and the female and put them together, then you've got the accurate identification of how many people are in this age group. More importantly, you've identified that it's the most common. Next thing you might want to do is then compare it to the one age group up, because this is a useful comparison. So you could then say the age group above the 0 to 4, the 5 to 9s, is smaller with only 3.3 million. Now that's once again a rough estimate calculate of this category and this category. Now you don't want to move your whole way up the pyramid. Because this is an 8-mark question, you're probably going to be looking to get 4 or 5 marks based on descriptive statements. You might look to notice anything in the pyramid where there is a noticeable change. In this case, the 35 to 39 has quite a dramatic difference to the 30 to 34. So we could say there is a big drop in the 30 to 35 age category with only roughly 2 million. Now that 2 million comes from female and male added together, compared to the age below, the 30 to 34, where there is roughly 2.4 million. Okay. Other key suggestions, depending on the pyramid that you're looking at, if you do notice a gender difference, so for example, we can see in the 70 to 74 age group in Malawi that there is more people in the female age categories than the male. Now it's quite difficult to work out exactly that difference, but you could say 0.1 million in the 70 to 74 age group, whereas of roughly 0.2 million in the female age group. So if you do spot a noticeable age difference, that would certainly help you pick up one of your marks. Now, this is a typical period in Malawi. If it's a developed country, it's going to have a very different structure, with the base being much narrower, with fewer people in the younger age categories. And the top of the pyramid is much likely to be much wider. It really doesn't, however, matter as long as you make 4 or 5 statements identifying key changes where you notice something changing noticeably, identifying the most of something, and if there's a particular area where there's a lot less of something, then also pointing that out, as I did with the male and the female. Okay, that takes care of the describe. The explain, now that requires you to give reasons for the numbers in the different age categories. Now, because this is Malawi, we're dealing with a developing world country, and it's very clear to see that we have a large number of children in the older age group. So any point that explains high birth rates in the case of Malawi would be getting you a mark. So, for example, if you said that most people in Malawi work in agriculture, and as this is non-mechanized in Malawi, it's likely they're having large families in order to provide a workforce to work in agriculture. That would be 1 mark. There is a range of different areas that you should have learned when you were revising this that will help you explain the high birth rates. Next thing you can do is, generally with countries in the developing world, there's often a noticeable drop-off between the 0 to 4 and the 5 to 9. Now this reflects high levels of infant mortality, and as long as you can explain 1 or 2 reasons for why there's high infant mortality, then you'll also pick up marks. So for example, you could say due to a lack of vaccination programs in countries like Malawi, Many young die in the first few years of life, which helps explain why there's a sudden drop in the age group above the 0 to 4. The final part to successfully explaining this population pyramid is the very few people in the oldest ages. Now, this reflects a low life expectancy and reasonably high death rates. So anything that can help explain that will get you marks. So for example, you could say there are very few in the oldest age groups, for example, the 70 to 74, and this reflects the lack of healthcare or limited access to healthcare for people living in Malawi, and when they get unwell, they're unlikely to be treated or receive medicine. Now, all of those are explain factors which are offering reasons for high birth rates, high infant mortality rates, and low life expectancies. Second thing that you have to consider is if your pyramid's not Malawi, if it is a developed world country, for example, the United Kingdom, your points are going to be very different. In that situation, you are going to be looked to give reasons for the low birth rates and the reasons for the high life expectancies. Okay, so it's well worth noting down, in this case, 4 or 5 marks, but if this was simply an explain question, you'd be looking for possibly 6 to 8 reasons for the differences in the number of young children, relatively less in those age groups, and very few in the old age groups, or indeed, if it's the UK, the opposite of that.